So welcome to our webinar, What is Color Part 2 today. Today we will talk about color communication, tolerances and challenges in color communication. First, a few words to me, who's talking to you today. My name is Jessica Landherr. I'm responsible for the GMG Academy here in the GMG headquarters in Tübingen. I'm with GMG since 2008. And before GMG, I was a media designer at a print house, so in the printing prepress, and then I studied printing technologies engineering, and this is how I ended up working for GMG actually. In the past, I was pretty much involved in profiling for Colorproof, Color Server, Smart Profiler, so even for digital print. This was especially the time when I was in the department Application Technology here at GMG. Okay. Our topics today. What is my reference? So an important and too often ignored topic. Tolerances and expectations. So what do we expect in terms of quality, and what are the tolerances we are fighting with? Regarding the rules and the expectation management, we can only automate something if the target is clear and if the automation fulfills the expectation. We will talk about this. Then we will have some color management basics. So for an automation of a color workflow, we need a sophisticated color management setup. So some basics to understand those tolerances and expectations so they do not overpromise. It's important to find the right level where given tolerances are still leading to acceptable results. We will talk about automation. We will talk about common appearance. Afterwards, I have just one slide about standards, but we will see how we end up in this webinar. So, let's go. So, okay, let's look into our first sample for explaining our color communication expectations. What is my reference? The reference is pretty often something very subjective. So the images, the color arts, that's always kind of an emotional thing. So one person may be heavily attracted by one image, the other may not be attracted at all. So it may be the story around personal experiences you have, or the actual feeling or the actual mood you are in. I'm explaining all this to describe the importance or the necessity to keep these creative processes out of the game when we talk about preparing data for an industrial process, like preparing data for a print brochure. Okay, so let's start. So this is the moment. I'm standing here in this beautiful landscape and I want to capture this. I want to take a photo. So my camera is a good one and I might use this picture later on. Okay, wow, that's it. That's my picture. Data is captured. And how can I now make sure that this impression I have now and here is kept with my image actually? So is the little display of my camera really telling the truth? And if I use this image later in different ways, will it then always be this result that I expect when I look here at my camera display, using it for web, different printing processes? So some of the main criteria that are heavily responsible for the visual appearance of an image are color, color contrast, contrast in general, and the sharpness. So how do I make sure that all these criteria interact in a way that my impression of this image is kept. So how can I measure these criteria? Or do I need other tools to visualize, kind of a reference image? Maybe my high-end monitor or high-end inkjet printer. I guess you all know everything looks so different. You should see it on your screen, hopefully. The monitor is way more saturated than the printer. Every monitor looks different. They all have different color gamuts. Every printer has a slightly different printout. So in the past, in the good old times, not very long ago, we used to have physical references for majority of pre-press jobs. So mostly we had photo slides that served as a reference for our image criteria. So the customers were standing even in the press room, comparing color, comparing contrast between the slide and the production print. And if there was any initial idea that was different from the impression on the slide, it was communicated in an analog way, as you can see here. So any changes we had to make were done in an analog way. With the analog reference we have actually physically in our hands. So now we are digital. Everything is digital now. And somehow it seems that we have forgotten the power of a physical reference we had before. So how do we now describe our reference actually? What is our reference if we don't have the photo slide anymore? How to manage the expectations if my image is going to be used in our multi-channel world, so in an advertisement, on a brochure, on a homepage in the web. How to make sure that all these final use cases of my image are at the end aligned to a common appearance of them. So with all the given tolerances, differences, limitations of the many, many output channels we have. So all devices that capture or define colors have their tolerances, obviously. Camera, scanners. The software that is used with any kind of color management setting may impact the colors of the image heavily as well. So as always, it is that the heaviest impact comes from the operators that are handling the data or setting up the presets. And it is still very rare to find accurate or accurately adjusted color management presets from agency to press room presets. So you can see here, you see it, a screenshot of the presets in Adobe. It is a very rare case that from the agency to the press room or to the press room pre-press, we have an aligned color management setup. So we all know the human factor is the most critical, obviously. We have some tools. We have ICC profiles. You may all know from your working practice, which try to overcome these tolerances and try to satisfy the user is a good expression. So satisfy the user's expectation in terms of common appearance. Of course, many variables we should keep in mind. So whatever the output is going to be in our multi-channel world, if you just look at the different printing processes, different substrates, inks or ink systems, all the print specialties, you know, or look the parallel use in an online publication. So we have many variables which are affecting the final result of my image, and every output channel has to be recognized in the way best possible. So, okay, let's get some years back. So when we had the photo slides as references, you may see it on your screens as well. Photo slides have a density and a color space that obviously exceeds typical printing capabilities. So already at that time, there was some over expectation on the customer's side. But at least he had a reference to compare to. So the reference actually was for both, for the customer and the retoucher as well. And the rest actually was arts. So pre-press and retouching guys were artists as well as the printers. So there were almost no ISO standards to help to improve and standardize recurring actions or to reach an agreed basic quality. So it was in fact, tremendous artistic and of course well-paid work. So with the standardization of the different printing method in the 80s to the 2000s, especially offset printing became more and more an industrial process. So press managers lost their former status as artists and had to follow defined rule sets through the standardization. But beside of the printing process itself, also many of the related topics had been improved. So we had the standardization of the viewing conditions, which is ISO 3664, or standardization of color measurement with our measurement devices. This is ISO 13655. These standards helped a lot to improve color communication to a new level, since when everybody has the same viewing conditions and measures color the same, you're talking about the same color actually. So printing became more reliable, more foreseeable, and more repeatable. So the logical next step was the development of characterization data. So characterization data are tables that are describing the color result, the colorimetric result of a specific output or printing condition, independent from the separation. So by using these characterization data, Prepress was getting a better and easier handling in their retouching work. So the average match between a proof and a printed job was getting better. And in consequence of the success of these characterization data and the related ICC profiles, customers and prepress houses started to standardize their print data preparation with maybe one or two of these existing data sets. So depending on the area, one or the other profile had and still has to serve for all CMYK data communication. You may all know this. I know it especially, I recognize it especially in the digital printing world, that FOCRA 39 is used as kind of an exchange color space. So data is prepared for FOCRA 39. So in the moment an agency does not really know which is the output condition or what output condition it is exactly, they may go with FOCRA 39 because we are doing this for a few years now. Okay, but we have to watch out. So all these data sets we're having today are not going to be valid forever. We see this on FOCRA 39 right now. So with the improvements in printing setup, consumables, hardware, the characteristic of a printed matter changes. It improves. And if you want to use that improvement, the data preparation should be aligned as well. So we are seeing this today with FOCRA 51, which is the successor of FOCRA 39. This new set of characterization data actually describes the same printing condition, but why did we have to get new characterization data then? Because the standard for the viewing condition changed and the standard for our color measurement changed. We have the new measurement mode M1 now. So our measurement devices and our eyes now see optical brightness in production paper way more than before. And of course, our characterization data set has to adapt on these changes as well. So if you have a changing characterization, maybe it's not the best way to use this as an exchange color space. So all these data set we just mentioned in the slide before are offset. Most of them are sheet-fed, and we have FOGRA 51, which is a new data set. They constantly change actually. So it was a logical development that from the standardized print, the color communication in prepress was driven. But the question is this a future-proof approach? So already today, the mismatch between delivered data and the real printing condition leads to a new level of creative data handling in the data reception of the press room, for instance. So traditional print, with all its limitations and all its strengths, is today only one of the many different output channels. So is this the right one to use as a neutral tool, as a color exchange color space for color communication? So what are the good printing references? Especially if I maybe even do not know my production parameters yet. So if I don't know where my image will be used later on. In Europe, would it be FOGRA 39? In the US, SWAP or Gracol is used. In Japan, Japan Color is used. So what's the good reference then? But why don't we turn the color decision, so the source for our color communication, to the creative people or to the print buyer? So if we are today handling suboptimal data in most cases, what do we have to lose? What do we have to gain, maybe? So if we look at the significant improvements in quality and efficiency that, for instance, offset printing has gained through the standardization, isn't there potentially the same potential for improvement if we standardize our color communication? With the proof, we already have right now the most reliable and accurate tool to visualize color and the content. So the expectations can be easily communicated with the proof. And I think we all agree, color communication with the proof works. So the RGB world in creation and in the agencies should set the rules for color communication. So these rules would deliver a good start for the complete communication with the print buyers without too much of an over or of under promising. Converting from RGB to CMYK is actually, a sensitive point, sensitive moment. So software and profiles which are used for the conversion have to be well aligned in order to really create an expectable result within the common appearance between each of the output conditions which is used. So To understand some of the main criteria that are to be considered when we develop such a communications color space, such a tool that empowers the input, we need to take a little view on some basics in color management. So there can be many kinds of conversions in a color management setup, from one RGB color space to another, from RGB to CMYK, or even from one CMYK color space to another color space, another CMYK color space. So one key criteria for the quality of these conversions is the used formula, which is described in the profiles you use for the conversion. So the formula describes how a particular color, or how all the colors in the color space from the source color space will be moved to the smaller color space, so how they will be squeezed in where this color does not exist. So the mathematic in the background is called gamut mapping. I'm trying to make this more visual in terms of gamut mapping. So what we see here now is an RGB color space. This is what we see here is actually Adobe RGB. In Creative Studios, this is a mainly used RGB color space. Okay, so now we see sRGB color space in comparison. So we already see this color space is significantly smaller than Adobe RGB, especially in the greens. And the shape is still comparable between both color spaces. sRGB is the most common RGB color space. So if you save images from your camera, from your hobby camera, or from your smartphone, these images are typically sRGB. So here we can see a CMYK color space in comparison. So it's obvious the different shape and of course the different size of the CMYK color space compared to the RGBs. In the green, red, and in the blue areas, the RGB color spaces are enormously larger than the CMYK color spaces. But we see that in the yellow area, our printing CMYK color space slightly exceeds the RGB color spaces. So let's have a look on how several CMYK color spaces compare to each other. So this violet color space is FOCRA 39, so ISO-coated version 2. And here we now see PSR LWC. So this is a printing standard for publication gravure printing on LWC paper, lightweight coated paper. We see the shape is slightly different. So the yellow, or the primary inks in gravure printing, are different than the primary inks in offset printing. This is why we have a slightly different yellow. We see the green area is not, is significantly smaller actually. So the shape is slightly different. This small one, the small color space here is ISO newspaper 26 version 4. So this is the small color space as we reach it on daily newspaper, printed in cold set. So what we can see here now is that even with different primary inks, like in gravure, the characteristic of the color spaces is comparable, but not the size. So here we have a nice magnifier view on different offset printing results. So on the top we see offset coated, in the middle we see offset uncoated, and the lower one shows the print on newspaper. So if we would now measure the difference between the several magentas, yellows, cyans, it might be tremendous high delta E. So I guess somewhere between 10 and 20 delta E maybe. So, but I think we would all agree that on the different papers, this is something like the same cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So they are just showing a different result through the limitations of the paper they were printed on, but we would still agree that it's the same ink or the same color which is used actually. So this image perfectly shows common appearance. So let's get back to the color spaces. We didn't talk yet about the largest of the CMYK color spaces. This is the color master. So this is a proposed color space for color communication. We at GMG have developed this one some years ago, and we called it Color Master. In the US, they released a national standard last year or the year before. It's called CGETS 21. CGETS 21 describes several color spaces, and as the largest of them, they are also using our Color Master. The only difference is they call it CRPC 7. I have some more details about the CGETS 21 color spaces later on. So Color Master was designed to be smooth and independent from the typicities of offset or gravure printing. So yeah, kind of an average between these two printing technologies and their natural behavior. So Color Master is large enough to just cover all of the relevant standards from 4-color CMYK printing. So the Color Master allows slightly more vibrant colors than, for instance, FOCRA 39, since it's covering all the 4-color printing standards. Of course, when we see the comparison to RGB again, of course, much less vibrant than the RGB color spaces, since we are still talking about a CMYK color space. So we talked about gamut mapping. So the formula to describe how an out of gamut color is going to be squeezed from a big source gamut, maybe from RGB, into the small target color space, maybe CMYK. So all these green and red areas the CMYK color space cannot show have to be kind of pushed into the CMYK color space without having any clipping. So with keeping the contrast and keeping the common appearance of the actual RGB image. So the smaller difference between the several CMYK color spaces we just saw, so the gamut mapping from RGB to Color Master shows a very comparable effect as the gamut mapping shows from RGB to one of the smaller CMYK printing color spaces. So on a bright and colorful image, Color Master already shows the effects that would occur if the image is separated into any CMYK color space. So if the gamut mapping strategy which is used is consistent, the several results of CMYK color spaces which are separated from an RGB image will look comparable to this Color Master reference. So using this Color Master as a reference for color communication would still mean to keep the images in RGB. So Color Master really just serves as a preview, as a better replacement actually of our good old photo slide. So Color Master could be our reference for our preview. So it is at the very, very end of the process. So at the moment when all output parameters are known, that the images would be converted from RGB to, for instance, ISO-coated version 2, FOCRA 39. So what's the benefit from keeping the images in RGB? The vibrance of the RGB color space is still in the image. So for any use case, the data is media neutral. The data is independent from every use case. Retouching is significantly easier. In Adobe Photoshop, we have more options to work on an RGB image than we have on a CMYK image. Just some of the benefits. So CMYK data may just add complexity that we should not have to take care about in creating and in retouching. As I already said, the full quality, of course, can only be obtained if the used gamut mapping algorithm is consistent in the background. Okay, what tools would we need to work that way? We need the customer to understand and to use this master color space. We need a proof setup, we need a soft proof setup, so the color can be seen and approved or judged. And we need software with the pre-installed profiles to do all the work, to do the conversions. In the end, we need to know our output conditions, how the productions will run. And then, how will it look like? So here I have my reference now. This is my RGB image on my camera display. And if I now switch, I look at my image in the CMYK preview. So I'm using as a reference my color master. This is a step I would do in Adobe Photoshop, for instance, for judging my image. I will switch back and forth. Maybe you see some differences. So we're now looking at RGB and now color master CMYK. This image is does not have the color areas where the big differences between RGB and CMYK are. So we see slight differences in saturation. So, and then I just, when I say, okay, my image is fine and I'm done retouching, I just automate with some color server my original RGB to my output condition conversion. Of course, in a common appearance. So this would then look like this. So in the back we see our reference, and now I will convert into different output conditions. For instance, FOCRA 47, which is uncoated paper, or even newspaper printing. Of course, all these images look different due to the printing process, due to the paper, but the reference still was a good compromise between all of these different output conditions. So, in the past years, it was already a lot that could be automated. With every year, there were new technologies for automation, whatever steps in the process, in the print production process. And at the same time of automation, actually the quality improved as well. So the effective standard in this described automation is the color conversion method, which is gamut mapping. So actually several associations in our industries are discussing and researching on topics like standardized gamut mapping or how do I measure common appearance. Unfortunately, today we don't have a standard yet. We just have an approved working scenario. A standard would be very, very nice. So this is an example for common appearance. We have the IKEA catalog. That's actually a pretty old slide. It's from 2009 or 2010. So we have the catalog, we have the layout. The catalog is produced all over the world. Of course, means we have to face different printing standards. Within these different printing standards, we have a whole bunch of production papers we are actually printing on. So even when I'm in my printing standard in the same paper class, you may all know we still have differences in the paper tints. And with the variety of the printing substrates, we print on very, very different locations all over the world. But in the end, I want my catalog to actually look the same, to have the common appearance in all of my catalogs. IKEA is actually using the Color Master for their production. So I already promised talking about CGETS 21, the standard in the that we will have a closer look on the CRPC color spaces. So here we can see all the 7 CRPC color spaces. So we have from ultra wide CRPC 7, which is the largest one, the Color Master, to CRPC 1, which is a newspaper type of gumwood. So the CRPCs from 1 to 6 are based on offset printing color spaces, but we're talking about the US, we're talking about G7 with a near neutral calibration, with a near neutral gray. And with the TVIs and the primaries of these color spaces, they are not exactly conforming to the targets from ISO 12647-2 2013. So the ISO standard, the international standard describing offset printing, describing the targets for offset printing. All these characterization data, the CRPCs, are described to be M1, so the new measurement mode, and the paper tints correspond pretty well with the values written in the ISO 12647-2. And as these characterization data sets are already partly in use, we can reflect from the US experiences, and one reflection is that it seems it is too early to have this as an international standard. They wanted to, they even had a number for it, ISO 15339. But it would have been too early to release it. And the M1 paper tints, which are described in the standard for the different CRPCs, are not well aligned with reality. So this causes more trouble than needed, and maybe it was just a bit too early to have this. But nevertheless, still a very, very good approach and a good step further into standardizing color communication, actually. So, if you have any questions regarding my monologue now, just feel free to type them in the chat, even if maybe tomorrow you may end up with a question. Just drop us an email and we are willing to help. That's no problem. So, meanwhile, while you're thinking if you have any questions, I just want to tell you something about the Academy in general. So we're not only doing webinars, we're doing any kind of training you can imagine. So we're having a training portfolio with scheduled trainings which take place here in Tübingen in our headquarters. But nevertheless, you have the possibility to visit trainings in our subsidiaries in the UK, in the US, and we still have the possibility that a trainer from us visits you and trains you and your colleagues. So actually, almost everything is possible, I will say. And I want to show you quickly our website. So maybe you already know. So on our website in Know-How Academy, you see our training portfolio. You see we have even topics which are not related to our products. And of course, we can train everything about our products, obviously. You already can see, so this training class, Color Management Basic, is scheduled for taking place here in Tübingen in April. Nevertheless, in other regions, if Tübingen is too far to travel, just contact us and we will see what we can do for you in the UK, in France, in the US, in Sweden. We travel anywhere. That's no problem. So just feel free to browse and to see what we have in our portfolio. So I see we have a question in our chat window. Do others like Agfa and Kodak use the Color Master Space from GMG? Actually, I hope not. Maybe they are using the CRPC7, but Color Master is actually a product of GMG. And yes, you receive the presentation as PDF in the follow-up email, together with the recording. So, okay. So, if there are no questions for now, I just want to say thank you very much. As I just said, if any question comes to your mind, just contact us. We like to help. So, thank you very much and have a good evening or have a good afternoon.